And I am going to bring you one of the best next. Coming directly from Chicago, Illinois today, we have Marco Chmura with us. Marco is the Director of Quality and Transformation at Morningstar, serving the company for 13 plus years. He's responsible for driving transformation initiatives across the entire organization, specifically to help shape and implement RPA and other intelligent automation, as well as enhance the impact of Morningstar's research. Marco, it's always a gift to have you with us. You are a thought leader and practitioner. Don't find many of those, and very, very grateful for you to take the time to share that expertise and wisdom for our global audience today.
Oh, I was muted. My pleasure. Thank you, Jose. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Happy to be here. We'll go ahead and share. So I will be talking about Morningstar's RPA governance program. Today, I'm going to run through the following agenda. For those of you that haven't heard from me before, I'll give a little bit of background around Morningstar and our RPA program. I'd like to run through a few recent examples of how we've applied RPA, talk a little bit about our overall strategy, some of our next steps and areas of focus, as well as some of the learnings we've had at the program level. And then I'll get into a little bit about our governance program and the fact that we had to make some adjustments for SOX compliance, how that's going, how we're managing our controls, learnings from that as well, and then we can get into some questions. Okay, so just to start, for those of you not familiar, Morningstar is an investment research company. We build software products and data packages based off of the investment data that we collect, as well as our proprietary research, like our star ratings. We've scaled and expanded a lot over the years since we were founded in the mid-'80s. We've acquired companies, we've expanded, we've migrated, transitioned, and of course that's created a lot of processes and a lot of different connections that made us really a great candidate, like a lot of companies, for automation. And I think we really started to take that to the next level as a discussion topic around 2015, 2016, and it really led us to start to experiment with new things like RPA. So we began our program in the beginning of 2018. We currently have a center of excellence approach to how we are doing our development. So we have 10 RPA developers that are fully dedicated to developing processes for the company. We also have a very skilled and effective RPA architect that helps control all of our back-end infrastructure, as well as helping manage the process and the developers. We work very closely with the over 200 plus process owners at Morningstar. We've established a great relationship with our process owners as a quality and transformation team to be able to help serve them in applying Lean Six Sigma and other process improvement techniques to help shore up their processes and the way that they serve their clients. While doing that, there's of course a lot of iterations and ideas and improvements that come along. A lot of those improvement ideas to make a better process will involve centrally improving the technology, but once we had RPA available, we were really able to add a new tool to the toolkit that these process owners use to improve their processes. So they've been a very key partner for us, and it really allowed us to embed ourselves in the teams a lot earlier than maybe we would have been able to without that kind of program in place. We of course work very closely with our technology and product owners across the company to make sure we're in sync with what we're doing and how we're automating. We are a UiPath shop. We have been with UiPath since the beginning. We'll be entering our year 5 contract this coming September. So again, we're in the middle of year 4 here. We currently have 26 bots, 8 attended, 18 unattended. We're also experimenting and we're also leveraging Abby Flexi Capture software for our document understanding. We're experimenting with internal chatbots, and we're continuously evolving our approach to adapting and adopting machine learning and AI models and building out our functionality there, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. We operate a lot of our bots using service accounts, which is also something that I'll talk about in a little bit with some of the challenges that we face. days. Using the Service Console allows us to have those bots access a lot of different applications for a number of different process owners. We have been able to automate over 500 processes so far. We've saved annualized hours of about 75,000 hours, which has led to a lot of opportunity to repurpose some work and get more impact out of a lot of our key employees, but also to deliver higher quality process work to a lot of our customers, internal and external, and obviously also be able to deliver a lot faster. I'll share again a few examples in a minute. This is our workflow, so real quick, pretty traditional. You know, we're helping teams identify processes, working with those process owners to try to find the ones that'll be the most impactful, helping them leverage our suite of templates to effectively document the SOP. In some cases, they can record it. In some cases, we'll do side-by-sides with the developer. There's also a review process. There can be a kickback process if a process isn't ideal for RPA development. You see kind of the criteria for process selection. One of the key things we're looking for is this is a frequently repeated process. And while you eventually kind of work your way through a lot of those, there's still a lot of that fruit out there for us to find. So as we work with teams and help them select processes based on the amount of development that's going to be necessary, which you can also often see from the length of an SOP and the amount of process steps involved versus how many times that process is executed, sometimes the hours aren't quite worth the development. So we'll make those decisions as well. But once we get past that, we'll go ahead and develop, have a QA and sign-off process, which is very important for SOX purposes, and then ongoing governance for our live processes. Of course, we're looking for processes that don't have an opportunity to be implemented centrally. Really need close partnership with our technology team to make sure that we're making the right decision by using RPA. A lot of times things will either be better served in the system, an enhancement is coming along, or there's just some functionality the team isn't even aware of, and this discussion kind of prompts figuring that out. As you can see in the bottom, we became officially SOX compliant by working with our internal audit team, our compliance team, our technology team to make sure that we had all the controls in place, which I'll give a little overview of a little later. But we are SOX compliant as of Q4 last year. Here's a use case that I like to share that our investment management team put together, which is really allowing us to manage some of our custodian updates. We do a lot of management of funds on custodian sites, and a key activity for that is actually determining the allocations for those funds. This is just a sample set of what some funds and share classes would be, but when the investment managers do the dirty work of figuring out what the new target allocation should be, maybe a little less percentage on this share, more on that one, as well as what share classes should be added or removed. After that process is over, there's this whole manual process that our actual investment management team would go through to log into custodian websites and do the updates. Once we introduced RPA to them, they were very happy that they no longer had to do that, and were even able to avoid some of the quality errors that could come from translating a spreadsheet like this into a custodian website. So the steps the bot follows are pretty simple. Get this Excel file, log into the platform, do the modifications, review, and get a notification out to the team that everything's been done effectively. Another very recent RPA project we've been working on that we're pretty proud of, because it's a little bit of improvisation, is trying to figure out how better to manage interview scheduling, which is really important right now because we've got a lot of staffing needs, and there's a lot of activity happening virtually. So this is the process for actually scheduling interviews with Morningstar leaders and employees for applicants, and just the complications that come with that, right? Opening up the schedule of all of these and allowing the applicant to be able to pick a time that they can actually meet. This was a lot of back and forth, usually between our HR operations team and the applicant, but we went ahead and built an automated process that allows them to kind of self-access a calendar that does show the availability of the people that the applicant will be interviewing with, and pick the slots that they'll be able to interview. And this is very similar to Time Trade, which is a vendor out there that really actually helps serve some of our appointments that our sales and service team will set up. But we actually were able to save quite a bit of money by using our RPA solution, building the interface you see there on the lower right that can allow us to interact with each other, and actually even being able to customize this more using RPA versus a Time Trade or other vendor solution. Actually, you can use RPA to say, we don't even want this interview to last a traditional chunk of 30 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes, which is usually the limitations that a lot of those softwares give you. So that's just one example of where we're pretty happy that we can end something. We can actually have a 45-minute interview, which is a pretty common selection for some of our leaders. So beyond those two use cases, just a little bit about our program and kind of how we're thinking about it, and a little bit of a timeline overview here. You can see kind of down at the bottom of the nice pyramid that we built here that we were just kind of applying traditional RPA in the beginning, using UiPath against some structured rule-based processes, getting some exposure to teams, showing some success, understanding, where we're, where we're building a good process and where we're challenged a little bit. And then as we moved into the next year, really evolving our ability to use OCR, do some document, leverage Abby FlexiCapture to really start to dig into some of the semi-structured documents that our data and research teams work with quite extensively, even semi-structured documents that are used, that apply to the investment management team, finance, HR, and being able to use Abby to help read through those documents and extract information, QA, and the like. Now as we're moving more towards intelligent process automation, really making sure that our developers are spending a portion of their time focusing on advancing their coding techniques, playing around with machine learning models in Python, finding use cases for unstructured data that we can really kind of sink our teeth into, even looking into some POCs we can apply with some vendors that are out there that I'm sure some of you have heard of. So we're really starting to think about how can we take advantage of intelligent bots and apply them in some of those areas I talked about. I think we'll see a lot of opportunity in customer service as well, which is an area, we've been able to apply RPA and have some pretty good success in, being able to manage all the different cases and information that's coming into our support reps, and especially the cases and tickets that get escalated down to our software and data collection teams that really need a bug fix and or need something done. The opportunity to leverage bots to just improve that workflow is pretty much limitless. Salesforce, which is what we use, obviously has some AI capabilities that we could pay for, but it's a little expensive, and our Salesforce structure doesn't necessarily align right now with probably some of the capabilities of Einstein. So before we get into a more bigger solution like leveraging a vendor, a solution like that, we'll experiment on our own a little bit and see where we're going to make the most impact before we jump into another vendor or even take advantage of the offerings that UiPath has. And then you see a little overview of kind of how information extraction has evolved, which is obviously the key focus of our developer team, and really being able to improve our ability to identify. Oh, and at the bottom, you see a few AI models we've been exploring, text classification and information extraction, Microsoft and Roberta. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about our COE as well, and really evolving the way that we manage some of the work. I will admit there are some challenges here with dealing with so much, input from so many different teams, managing in some cases, a pretty volatile backlog, which can change across teams, and there's a number of different ways to measure our capacity, our developer availability, and all the projects that we have to work through. So we've been shifting to a bi-weekly sprint model so we can be a little bit more predictable. And just to give you a little insight into how we're doing this, we're working in 2-week sprints, and we're basing a lot of our progress and trending off of the goals that we have. Of course, we have annualized hour goals. We want to be able to bring as much impact from RPA as possible. So we're averaging out how many hours we feel like we could do each sprint and working against that. This is a new model, so our accuracy is a little bit off sometimes with commitment and delivery, but we learn a lot from what can detract us from straight new project development. Actually, when you look on the right here, and you see, this is just an example of a sprint estimate that can really give us as the RPA leader group, as well as our key stakeholders, a better idea of what capacity is being dedicated to. Actually, right now we have 3 open dev roles that we're working to staff in our Mumbai RPA office. We're kind of always working through RPA development needs almost. It's obviously a pretty hot role right now, and we need to do all we can to keep our current developers happy, but also to find new talent. But while we do that, of course, there can be some periods of time where our developer licenses are unused or we're a little short on capacity. So just being able to illustrate that, understand how it impacts our sprints, our ability to deliver, more importantly, let our stakeholders know. And also being kind of thoughtful in what can we do to reduce our maintenance costs and the amount of time that we spend outside of working on new projects. We think of things like focusing on larger, more stable projects. We hope that AI will help bring focus to larger projects and really help teams think about some of the bigger wins that we can have, so that we're not, like I mentioned earlier, building these long processes that maybe only satisfy a few hours a quarter for a team, but can have a lot of maintenance costs, and then and issues too, and disruptions for the team, where RPA isn't really as great an experience as it could be, and focusing on the better ones. We can reduce maintenance costs and issues by having more input and awareness from our product and tech owners, as well as the process and tech owners. We send constant reminders out to be letting us know about system changes. Be cognizant of anything that's happening with your input files or your interfaces. Even test running some RPAs in advance when we know there might be issues, especially if it's a quarterly process that's critical. And the last couple quarters we've had some issues. How can we get out in front of that? How can we use some dummy data to test it each quarter to make sure nothing about the fields changed, or again, the input files? So some good ways for us to kind of reduce that gray slice that you see there. And finally, how can we leverage APIs? We do a lot of development right at the interface level. Salesforce, I mentioned, navigating that. Salesforce has an interface upgrade, Salesforce Lightning, that a lot of our teams are individually moving to at different timings. So it can create a lot of disruption to our workflow if we need to stop existing or stop new projects and work on something existing because there's an interface adjustment like that needed. And finally, another one that's popped up is Okta. So getting our single sign-on going. There's a lot of new security needs, and when we have service accounts running around doing things for Morningstar, when a change like Okta or single sign-on or anything to authenticate users to log in, I'm sure you've all been kind of receiving text alerts on your phone so that it authenticates to your computer. That creates problems for RPAs. So working with our tech team to make sure that we have solutions or exceptions in place before these new systems get released, so that we can make sure that we're, again, out in front of things and not dealing with disruption to our process owners' workflow. So I wanted to just kind of summarize some key learnings at the program level before I shift over to talk a little bit about our governance model. So the first thing that I have here is around, the vendor selection process, right? And this is actually something as a company we're trying to improve, build a framework for. That's also a lot of value my team can bring, is helping bring cross-functional groups together that work on a process. In this case, procurement, technology, finance, and stakeholder teams, and develop what should be the standard approach to navigating that process, in this case, vendor selection, and then having that standard in place and expectations set and roles assigned right when you get into a vendor selection process, as opposed to down the road. In this case, for RPA, you can be very thorough in evaluating all the vendors out there, taking advantage of research out there and whatever your company is aware of, and procurement teams, and then shortlisting it based on criteria that you have for yourselves before you kind of narrow it down to a few vendors, based on discussions, cost, availability, and do a proof of concept, and then get ready to, based off of the results, make your final selection and get started. And when you do get started, you always want to start small. Don't expect to dive out and get into the workflows of a bunch of different teams, because you're overwhelming yourselves. You definitely want to show some results with one team. Ideally, a team you're already closely partnered with, if you're a centralized separate team, so that you have some connections and you can really, get a good rhythm going right off the bat. And then once you show those results, start to build bridges among those teams. We love to be connectors of teams that are leveraging these technologies and frameworks, and kind of have them, scale up on their own. Always be a key partner with technology. I would say this is one area that we weren't 100% on top of, because I think our technology team, which is huge and vast, of course, but even at the leadership level, wasn't always completely familiar with what we were doing. So you've got to be, number one, aligned with them. And you've also, number two, once you do that, have to kind of have a rapport in that dialogue, like I talked about earlier, to evaluate trade-offs and make sure that you're evaluating the system of record and opportunities to develop centrally before you apply RPA, and that of technology decisions and future technology things on the roadmap that are going to impact RPA. And finally, and most important, engage leadership while working through teams. The worst thing is when you're making all this progress down in the weeds of some teams. They're doing some good things, but leadership isn't aware. That really limits your ability to scale, and of course, you get more support and buy-in and involvement. And actually, that last point is key too. How can we tie in automation to our performance goals? We had the similar idea around lean, right? Like a team can be dedicated to lean and process improvement, but if it isn't in their performance goals, you got to question how much they really are dedicated to it, and that usually ends up resulting in maybe not getting as much out of it, obviously, as you could if it was part of your goals. And finally, look outside for help and partner with your vendor. Make sure that you're meeting regularly with your vendor, obviously understanding what's coming down the pipe, but also getting their input on how your program is being run, what opportunities you have to adopt new technologies, and also get maybe some events going. So what we've done actually at Morningstar, which I've shared before, because we haven't been able to schedule a live event yet, but we're talking about it now, and we'd love to do that again. But we actually had UiPath come and present to Morningstar a few times and share an RPA awareness session. We even had a few Design-a-Bot sessions in Chicago and our Mumbai office, where we had UiPath leaders come in and actually, for folks that don't do obviously regular RPA development, to get a little flavor of it by experimenting and building a few bot processes and really learning how it works. And then finally, we had a RPA Fair Championship, which is a great way to engage teams, engage folks not aware of RPA. We had this one at the bottom right there in our cafeteria, and we had a lot of displays set up where teams could showcase their success, talk about RPA, and become advocates, for the whole effort. We also participate in an RPA roundtable. I've participated in a few, and I love conferences like these so that we can make connections and we can learn what each other are doing. We've been connected with Discover Financial here in Illinois for a while, and what we were doing on a continuous improvement front. So it was natural for us to talk about the fact that we were both getting into RPA around the same time. And they actually were nice enough to coordinate an RPA roundtable, which we still have today, and a number of different companies participating. We'll get together and talk about what I'm talking about today, RPA and IA, and what this whole conference is about, and how we're applying governance design, how we're tracking our success, identifying processes, and what our op models are, if anyone's venturing into new tools. And we'll even have some focus sessions where some of these, including our company, can give a little overview of what they're doing. So I'm a big advocate of reaching out to colleagues in other companies and understanding what's happening outside your world. So that was it on kind of catching us up on Morningstar. I'd like to spend the rest of the time kind of talking about our governance plan and why we got so wrapped up into becoming SOC certified, because it actually was a decision for us. I wish we would have gotten into it earlier, because it's very important, obviously, for us to be able to leverage RPA across our financial reporting processes, as well as just some other areas that are very bound by SOX controls. This was very important because as soon as you have RPA being leveraged for those, we have to make sure that the proper restrictions are in place and that everything is being managed properly. So we had finance on hold for a while, and we're really happy we've been able to open up the gates because they have a lot of good processes coming in, and I'll share a simple example in a bit. But this also allows us to minimize the risk of unauthorized or unintended actions by the bots, being very diligent and organized in the way that we have our sign-off process, in the way that the developer handles the SOP information, codes it, presents the code to the process owner, gets sign-off before putting it into production, and then not touching it unless there's another adjustment submitted, to make sure that everything the bot is being told to do is being properly filtered through from the impacted teams, stakeholder teams. And this, of course, is a low risk, but having controls in place does minimize our security risk of any unauthorized access to RPA. So there's 13 general controls for IT SOX compliance. They cross security administration, change management, and availability of data. I'll go through a quick example that'll help you get a better understanding of what these are, but we basically had to, ask a lot of questions and work very closely with our compliance team to understand what these controls were, so that we had the right administrators in place, that we were sure about our RPA user isolation, that the developers were well managed, that we were properly testing like I talked about, that we have backups and DR in place as well. So I'm going to just kind of give a quick process example. You may have seen this before, but it's nice to kind of jog the memory about how these controls work. So this is a simple process and very applicable across many companies, but for Morningstar, this is our contract billing entry process, and very manual in that we have a set number of analysts over the years that are just logging into Salesforce, opening up all our different contract billing forms, and then translating the information over to Oracle. So very manual user entry and very voluminous. So this is quite a time consumer, and even after that, we'll actually have a validator review and then a different validator approve, and that's kind of prior to any involvement of RPA or anything else. That's where the control really is important, is that is each contract gone through the process correctly? Well, once we were able to introduce RPA to this process, we could knock out those first 5 steps. Not too super surprising, but we now have the bot doing all of those steps, and then we just kept in those last 2 to make sure that we're still doing the manual needed work to sign off on the contracts, which is much quicker now, and we've saved a ton of time on this process so far. And it helps obviously expand into other areas where we have contract billing going on and a number of other finance processes. But what I do want to share here is how the controls really helped with that simple process. So when we think about security admin, all 3 folks involved, which is the bot developer, the process owner, and the RPA, or the bot itself, the developer and the process owner, they all now have their access reviewed in the beginning when they get access to that bot code, but then every quarter we're now going through a whole access review process. We now have all the passwords complying with standards. So prior to the SOX controls, we actually were a little bit loose in the way we were managing passwords, so we cleaned that up. After applying SOX controls, we also now have all of our source code reviewed and restricted to appropriate devs, and we put in firewall access to make sure that is monitored and that no devs get access to code that they're not supposed to be seeing. When it comes to change management, we actually put detective monitoring in place using Jenkins, and it ensures that the process owner signs off on any code before it goes to production, which is a key, kind of a key control in place, especially when we're dealing with anything that impacts financials, so that we're sure the process is doing what it was supposed to be doing, and that we have evidence retained in case there's any issues or questions down the line. And then finally, do we have proper availability of data? Do we have a server in place that is backed up and is tested annually, and is our restore process secure and tested? So that across that one process, you can see where the controls come into place and how we really kind of shored up what we were doing with RPA prior to having SOX controls in place. That might sound like a lot of work, so whenever there was manual effort involved, we made sure to see if we could apply RPA to aid in us executing those controls and doing those quarterly reviews. So actually dumping data out of the UiPath orchestrator, which houses all of the bot and code information, and comparing it to our Jira instance. We use Jira to manage all of the different project requests that we get, the stages they move through, the SOP documentation, the process owner, but also the process for signing off. When did it happen? Was there a subtask associated with it that said the process owner approves this? So we will actually just dump all that data and do a comparison to make sure that all access is still where it needs to be, and the bot will quickly kick out any exceptions that need to be reviewed. Exceptions could be because somebody moved teams, or they changed even companies, they left the company. Usually other controls will catch that, but this is a good kind of final review. Automation for adding new users to access the robot. This user access and this official kind of tracking of users was a little more informal prior to control, so having the bot do that for us is great. Same with the removing inactive employees, checking Workday, being more cognizant about passwords and missing QA tasks, and then, like I mentioned, user position changes. When we think about all the work that went into that, some ways that we can, probably could have done it better, some key learnings. So first is, how can we start thinking of controls earlier? What are some of the ways that we can stand ourselves up so that when we have to put controls in place, we weren't going to have to go through the big effort that we went through, and maybe what even could have been bigger. Having centralized development, which we did for the most part prior to controls, but we even had to shore up a few outside development teams just to make sure everyone was in this proper center of excellence that was managing RPA across the board consistently and with those standards in place. So if you have the opportunity to centralize or at least keep good track of all of your development resources, that'll go a long way in helping you establish those controls. Talk governance in your program from the outset. Set realistic expectations for how much you're going to be able to put in place when. There's a lot of time that goes into it, and there's a lot of need to be properly established before scaling out to so many teams and having so many different tickets and users to manage. So having some idea in place of how you're going to manage all that from the beginning is key. Talk to other teams. For us, we were very kind of ignorant to controls and all that goes into this, and having good governance in place. So there was a lot that we could learn from other teams, like managing Salesforce, which is a SOX application, managing Oracle and access to those, and all of the back-end infrastructure controls that need to be in place. So we were really able to get a lot of feedback, input, and materials from those teams in advance. And I actually probably could have even caught up with them earlier. So these are all learnings that we get. And then finally, ensuring good ownership and commitment. If you have an opportunity to isolate an RPA architect that can be responsible for governance, whether it's their full role or just partial role, that will be key in making sure that we're not doing this in piecemeal and that it's tight. He did a great job of creating all of the documentation, keeping everyone on track. It's easy to kind of lose track of where the compliance team is and reviewing your controls documentation and checking on things, especially when they have so many responsibilities. So having a good project manager in place was very helpful. And making sure that your stakeholders and your teams are involved, right? The more that the teams are bought into RPA and are engaged and they own the prioritization and the reviews and the sign-off, the easier it's going to be to apply these controls, because there is a lot of kind of participation necessary from the participating teams. So, I talked about the roundtable we have with some other companies. We also have a lot of internal committees across our teams where we meet regularly, not only to talk about the list of projects and opportunities we're working through, but also to talk about controls, make sure they're being managed effectively, and make sure everyone's aware of what they're supposed to be doing. So that's pretty much a wrap. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of background around the Morningstar program, where we're at, some of the things that we're working on and where we're going, as well as how we've set up our governance program and some of the controls that we've put in place. So I'll go ahead and stop, and we can now jump into any questions if you have them, or you can always feel free to reach out to me directly.
Marco, always a masterclass, from strategic to tactical. Really appreciate the coverage. We have questions coming in here that I'm going to share with you. And first of all, congratulations on a terrific journey there at Morningstar. And of course, you're very articulate in the way you share that journey. There are a lot of questions that came up during this last 3 days on this conference related to how to deal with unstructured data versus structured data, RPA versus intelligent automation. And there was like this one pyramid that you had there had a lot of answers to those questions early on. And you provide a lot of very helpful insights throughout. So we are all very appreciative of that. William Fuller has a couple of questions here. William is a cross-industry leader of improvement and innovation, deep experience and expertise, always asking very insightful questions. So great to have you with us, William, and engaged. And the first one is related to when you had your flow of how you do the RPA development, and you had he comments that it's interesting to see the SOP documentation and review called out in that workflow. Is it conceivable that RPA and its cousins can exist without standardized work? And he asks because some leaders seem to resist investing in standardization efforts. And so I think the way I interpret this question here is that is standardized work necessary for RPA to flourish or not?
That's a great question. I think it's something, we even ask ourselves because we don't want to do too much overkill, in order to have a well automated process. But at the same time, I really do believe that standards are incredibly helpful. We've done a lot of work. I talked a lot about our lean program and how much standards we worked to apply for teams that manage processes. I mean, one of the big standards in the beginning is actually who is the process owner? Who owns this process, right? You can ask that question and get a lot of answers from people, or you can just get a blank stare. So having a standard for a process owner in place for key processes is one that we've been trying to apply for years, building out that process owner role. And when you are a process owner, we really expect that you're very cognizant of the workflow involved in your process, the participants, and we even very much have always encouraged process documentation to help, obviously guide. Nobody really follows an SOP while they do a process, but for new employees and for when there are challenges and adjustments that need to be made, it's a super big help. When you translate all that to RPA, we would love to, well, number one, we'd love to take advantage of process mining and any kind of recording technology out there so that we don't even have to go through the manual kind of step diagnostic process and the information that needs to be created now. We're not really at the size that we're going to take advantage of something like that yet, and I don't think we've really justified the cost for it, nor have we, reached our point where we necessarily need that to identify processes. But I do find that to be maybe a valuable way to avoid kind of the documentation that we've been talking about. We did experiment with videos. Just take a video of your process, and that's not really a standard, right? That's just a way to share with the developer, even do a side-by-side. Our developers are located in Asia, so sometimes there's some time differences, but we'll make connections and have a developer actually watch a process owner. But really over the years, I found nothing beats just having something at least loosely well documented. And we do have a standard in place for that. We have a template that we use for RPA development. And it really helps our developers understand the process. It helps you, there's so many times our developers see a better way to run that process, to avoid using a macro or to avoid accessing so many different applications because they were able to see it laid out versus seeing it maybe, done on a screen or something like that. And then finally, it's very helpful when there's issues down the road, right? And when there's maintenance necessary. And if like Salesforce interface changes, if you have a nice layout with screenshots and information around the steps that you can work off of, and if it's a new developer that didn't develop it originally, all of this will make your program a lot more stable.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on so many critical points there. We can talk about each one of them for hours. Process ownership and standardization. On the standardization alone, I'll actually disagree with William. I actually think that most teams, they come together and they realize, oh, we should standardize it. The issue is that there are 6 people sitting around the table and everyone say we should be standardized my way in the way I want to do it. And that collaboration, as you said, to among the parties to come up with a standardization that we can agree on And then, from a lean perspective, before you automate, you should always eliminate and reduce that unnecessary complexity before we jump into that automation step. Following up on this, do you, when you're, the perception, of course, your presentation is very focused on compliance, and then the question that came up during your presentation is that when you're designing and implementing RPA projects, are you focusing on function, or are you focusing on compliance?
Much more function. I mean, compliance restricts you in certain ways, of course, and you have to be very cognizant, like I said, of having the right people with access, the right process for handling and releasing the code and doing testing and whatnot. But when it comes down to it, our main focus is, like I said, the returns we're going to get from this. And that can be, of course, the main one is the hours saved, hours given back is what we like to say, right? Hours given back to the employees so they can do other things. But yeah, so that will be the, kind of like the quality and speed to process wins that we'll get. So yeah.
And Marco, you may have mentioned this, or I certainly have experienced this in your previous presentations, but the audience in this specific context may not know that. Just give them an order of magnitude. Actually, how many hours have been automated, because the numbers are quite impressive.
Yeah, so annualized, we've been able to automate about 65,000 annualized hours saved. And we can do some return on investment calculations with that, which I won't get into, but they're obviously based off of the amount of money that gets put into it. And that's both from the salaries involved, as well as the licensing costs and all the inputs that go into setting up an RPA program, against all those annualized hours saved based on the location that they're done and the salaries of those employees in those locations, and really get some good ROI, which we're seeing some good returns of, greater than 3 times worth investment to date, and that scales up pretty fast. So we'll definitely measure, measure in that way. Can you repeat the question again, though?
No, you got it. That was the question. It's the order of magnitude, how many hours? 65,000 hours is a lot.
Yeah, that's right, 65. And then about another 10,000 of one-time use. So we keep track of, because not all processes are going to be repetitive. We have done a few projects that are really just for one-time use. We had to get out of an application. We were retiring our use of QuickBase, and we realized that there was no way to avoid point-and-click exporting of all our attachments in there before we retired it. And the vendor wasn't willing to, they couldn't build a way for us to export everything at the same time and put it into some folders. So we had to go through it, and it was a very manual process. So we decided to build RPA to do all that extraction, and it was quite a decent effort to put the process together, but it saved much more hours than the point and click. So that was a one-time savings, and that's just an example of one. We'll track those hours too, and we've saved almost 10,000 hours on one-time project. So yeah, we've made a ton of gains. We've been able to give a ton of time back to some very strapped operational teams, especially in our investment management, HR teams. That interview scheduling is still being well received as we're having more and more interviews, and it's becoming more and more common right now for us to get more applicants going. So yeah.
Well, that's fantastic, and that was actually a question that was a follow-up. I believe you just answered. What are you doing with all the redirected labor and additional capacity? It sounds like you're making good use of it and productive uses.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us are scaling right now. A lot of kind of open position, a lot of movement happening. So as much as you can, even in some ways, save an open role and repurpose folks because you're able to automate something. Especially when you're in a lot of shared service center type work, that can be a great opportunity to take advantage of growth or attrition in a smart way.
And one quick one here, just to wrap up. There is an overall theme about, first of all, thank you, great job presenting this very effective implementation over time. Really good job by you and the entire team. and the audience is curious about how you influence senior leadership specifically, and the ones who are sponsoring this type of work. Tell us a little bit about how did you win their hearts and minds about RPA?
Sure, and still trying to win in some ways. You know, it's a never-ending fight. I think you know, the ability, you know, I can't help but make parallels to lean and continuous improvement efforts, right? But when you have big wins within teams and they can hear it from the mouths of their own employees, or, you know, employees that they work with, and they can see real life use cases, that's the most powerful thing, right? So there's that. As much as we can broadcast the success we've been having, the better. Bring in experts if possible. You know, we connected some of our leaders with members of UiPath so they could have conversations themselves. UiPath offered, and I haven't done it yet, and I think this is a great idea, but they wanted to connect, and we will do this, build a connection between our finance team and leaders and their finance team and leaders, to show, for UiPath to explain how they've eaten their own cooking and applied RPA to their finance processes, so that they can just kind of have an exchange. Well, you know, we are the RPA company and we do the same finance stuff you guys do, and this is how we've used RPA. So, you know, as much as you can build collaboration with your leadership team, and then, you know, do awareness sessions. A lot of times, you know, my team kind of, our focus can get sometimes distracted. So when we go a while without marketing RPA, talking about the wins, sharing with leaders, getting, even if possible, our CEO to talk about it briefly in a town hall, getting blurbs on our internal website, we'll hear it, right? Well, I haven't heard about RPA in a while, what's going on? And that's a negative, right? So as much as you can be your own marketing department and even get help from internal communications to keep broadcasting the message, I think that's a great way to win hearts and minds over time. You know, and it's unique, it's something new. So I think, you know, even if there's resistance to automation, there's just something about it that you can't quite argue with when you see results.
Great advice, Marco. On behalf of our global community, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Such an articulate presentation of the key strategies and tactics. We very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for us.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. Glad to be here, and I hope you all take care, and good luck in the rest of the year as we all kind of get back into, I guess, hybrid office settings, which will be interesting as well. But yeah, thanks, Jose. Right. Take care and have a great week.
You too. Thank you. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Marco Chmura, Director of Quality and Transformation at Morningstar. What a wonderful way of completing our journey of RPA and intelligent automation. It's been a true pleasure to be your host for these 3 days. We've brought 12 cross-industry global leaders and experts in this area. We attacked culture, we attacked RPA, we attacked intelligent automation from multiple perspectives, and we were better off as a result of your rich engagement and insightful questions. So I want to wrap up by reminding you that our next conference is BTOES Enterprise Architecture Live. Will take place July 13th through 15th. Make sure that you sign up for that so that you guarantee your spot as a registered participant. I want to thank again our sponsors, Blue Prism, BPMD, and UiPath for allowing us to have access to this high-level content at no cost. We appreciate that. I want to thank Vijay Bajaj, who is the CEO of Proqis Digital, for creating an environment where great people and great ideas can connect, like this environment, on a global scale. And of course, Brian Raffel, the conference producer and real engine behind all of this. He makes it all work seamless, an incredible amount of work and detail and intelligence that goes into producing an event of this scale. And I want to thank you all for staying with us for 3 days, for participating, engaging, and enriching every one of our sessions. You can go onto LinkedIn. I'm going to be posting an update this afternoon on the on this session that I already, that has this conference under my name on LinkedIn. So there will be a little brief and pictures from the conference, and also feel free to add any comments, likes, shares on that account. and share your perspectives, share your questions if you have them. And again, thank you so much for being with us. So whatever you are in the world, have a great rest of your day, have a great rest of your week, stay healthy, and we look forward to meeting you again soon in another virtual conference. Thank you very much.